measures neither wit nor courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our duty to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. Thank you, Mrs. Davis. That was very helpful.
We're delighted to have you here, and we're also delighted to be able to do this for all of the students who do not remember Robert Kennedy. I am old enough to remember the days when Robert Kennedy was very active in politics. I was privileged to attend the Neon, Kentucky hearing which Robert Kennedy held in the fall of 1968. I was then a senior in college. I remember that day well. It was tumultuous times in the country. Many tough things were happening in America, and we were very impressed that Robert Kennedy took the time to visit this part of the country. We are excited that you're here. We've been anticipating this event for quite some time. Sit back, relax, enjoy the evening. We think that you are in a historical event here.
It was the best of times, and it was the worst of times, as Dickens said so well. 1968. I was here at Alice Lloyd College. I was teaching sociology at 240, sociology of the Southern Appalachian region, and also teaching English as well. I heard that Kennedy was coming to have hearings on poverty in East Kentucky in an adjoining county, and would be conducting these in various places. Immediately I told my wife that I wanted Robert Kennedy to come to Alice Lloyd College. My students, I got word from the college, told them about it, and the students, I tried to prep them for the questions they would ask him, because we were asked to sit down front and ask all the questions. And so I said, please don't ask him cranial questions, ask him heart questions. Because the way I read him, from the way I hear him, is that he's a person who speaks from the heart, as all his family does. And so, and I said, be sure and don't ask him anything about the Viet Nam War, because the media is beating him to death on the Viet Nam War. And so we came to the Cushing Hall. We sat on the right-hand side as you go in, on front. Senator Kennedy came in with Senator Cooper, I think, and certainly with Carl Perkins and some others there, a whole entourage of them, a lot of media people with them. And my students seemed impressed with them. A lot of students were around, they were excited. And after he spoke, just a moment after the invitation, my smartest student, whose name was Barbara Thompson, shot her hand up, and she said to him, Senator Kennedy, what do you think about the Vietnam War? And that was an explosion that caused the whole thing to go on the rest of the way. Everything almost dealt with that, some social issues, but dealt with that.
Afterwards, several people are going to speak, including Peter Edelman, who was Kennedy's aide at the time, who came here and constructed the tour, and Dee Davis, who grew up in Hazard and saw Kennedy there, and Gurney Norman, a very well-known Kentucky author who also has written really eloquently about Kennedy. So
now, Alice Lloyd, as we all know, it's a special college, and the college expects a lot of its students, not only as students but as citizens. It's a place where students are encouraged to develop their skills, and along with their skills, their commitment, and I truly believe that without what I learned at Alice Lloyd and from Alice Lloyd, I never would have been able to achieve the things in my life that I've done and that have come to me, and I'm so grateful for that. But right now, I'm going to turn the floor over to Senator Kennedy so he can talk to you and find out for himself the the kind of young leaders that are being grown here at Alice Lloyd. Thank you very much.
What I've said regarding Vietnam, I've said many times. And just last Thursday in Chicago, I made a statement. The Tet Offensive shatters the mask of illusion that we have all used to blind ourselves from the true circumstances of that war. It's not because our soldiers are not brave, but what it is the misguided nature of this war. Because what we're trying to do is solve by military might questions that could only be resolved by the will and the conviction of the South Vietnamese. The United States cannot conduct a war based upon the subordination of moral standards just for immediate success. There are more things to consider. What we have now is a situation where the people in the highest levels of government will not tell us the truth. I take and I accept responsibility for some of what has taken place in Vietnam. But make this perfectly clear. In 1963, before his assassination, President Kennedy saw the same problems about which I speak tonight. I know if he had lived that he would not have enlarged the war, and I know the Vietnamese War would not become an American war. Nowhere in America is the irony between plenty and poverty more pronounced than Eastern Kentucky. You live in one of the most rich places in the world. The natural resources here in Eastern Kentucky, underground, are matched only, perhaps, by the riches that people find in Africa in the diamond mines. The coal that comes from Kentucky powers the factories throughout this country. The homes throughout America are lit and heated by Kentucky coal. You live in one of the most rich places throughout this country. But the problem is, with absentee ownership, that this great wealth here in Eastern Kentucky has been transferred out with little being returned and invested in Eastern Kentucky. Corporations have grown vast. Investors have garnered great profits from the backs of the workers of Eastern Kentucky. What we have is a situation where most of the wealth goes out of this country, goes out of this area, and what little is returned is distributed in an unequal way. This is a situation that is intolerable, and what we have to do is create an environment where the wealth generated by the natural resources of Eastern Kentucky remains in Eastern Kentucky.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Kennedy, are you running for president?
Well, that was a question that was asked over in Vortex today, and I'll give you the same answer I gave the nice lady over there. We're gathering information to take it to Washington, and that's one of the things we're going to do.
And one more thing, how can the people of Eastern Kentucky help bring industry to the area?
There's many things that the people of Eastern Kentucky can do, and not unlike many places throughout the country, some of the places that we have already begun to do certain things. First of all, what you're doing right now is the most important thing, getting an education, because an educated workforce is the most precious commodity that any industry can have. Now, the government can do certain things. They can develop the infrastructure. Congressman Perkins talked about roads. The government can construct roads. I've offered legislation to try to attract business into certain areas, such as Eastern Kentucky, by offering tax incentives. Those are the things that we can do. Those are the things that a combination of the private sector and the public sector working together, all those things together can help attract industry to a place like Eastern Kentucky.
Senator Clark, others had been holding hearings around the country about issues of poverty, low-income people in our country. And of course, right there you have a kind of a contrast in terms of national leadership that had a concern about those issues and I would say less attention nationally now to some of the same pressing problems. We just had some poverty numbers for 2003 released the other day, 35 million Americans in poverty. We've had a kind of a stealth increase in poverty over the last 3 years. From 2000, 3.4 million people in poverty than there were in the year 2000. We're really not paying enough attention to that. A number that strikes me particularly is we have a concept that you don't read about very much, but that we ought to pay more attention to, which is extreme poverty. And that is to say people who actually live in this country on an income, this very rich, wealthy country, on an income that's less than half the poverty line.
I want to talk a little bit about perception and policy and about the way we see ourselves and the way other people see us. And I want to talk a little bit about what I've come to learn in efforts at community change and how events like tonight's event and like the visit in 1968 work. In 1968, when Bobby Kennedy came to Eastern Kentucky, I was 16 and perhaps barely aware that he was there, but word got out, and after school in Hazard, I got a ride home. I remember running into the house, getting a hairbrush and combing my hair back and forth so that my hair dipped down like his, and then rushing back and getting in the car with my friends and driving to Liberty Street and looking at it all, taking in this kind of panoply that I'd never quite seen before. At the bottom of the street was this Lincoln with Carl Perkins in it, and all the local Pauls. They were ensconced. It's kind of smoke-filled car, and then there was Senator Kennedy walking up the street with this throng, reporters, observers, fans, well-wishers, everybody walking up, and I ran up to get in this entourage and to look. Liberty Street was a black neighborhood, row houses, coal camp style, giving way to hillside cottages, and the pavement giving way to dirt road the farther you progressed up the street. To say that most of this group never visited Liberty Street is understating the fact by a long shot. Like many mountain communities in 1968, the street reflected general conditions of poverty, but not everybody could see it. I remember standing in front of Blondie and Mattie Olinger's house and watching Kennedy on the porch and then tentatively going in, and like the others outside, we watched through the window as the senator talked to the family. And I knew Mrs. Olinger and several of the kids. Paul was a star athlete. George and I had a fist fight in the 7th grade. Payne, Jesse, Jimmy. Jimmy's son is now the star quarterback of the football team. And what I saw that day and what I saw at that moment for me was transformational. I began to see what others were seeing, and I began to see what others would be seeing when these news photos would come out later. And then all of a sudden I began to notice poverty that I had not really understood in any real way prior. There were hardworking families living with hard-hit circumstances all up and down that street. And all of a sudden, people understood that something was wrong. In a way, the town was busted. It was over. That the world was going to see our town, our area, and us in a different way than I'd seen it. They're going to see it the way I just learned how to look at it, and there was going to be plenty of embarrassment. To understand the mythology of the American dream.
Comments you have. Before we proceed, I hope she won't mind, but I want to tell you all that Mrs. Harry Cottle, Mrs. Cottle is here, and
briefly. I think that the visit that Robert Kennedy made here gave the general population, the students, the parents, the teachers, the minors, everybody hope. Because everybody knew him for what he was. They loved him for what his family had been to the nation. And he took an interest. He came here. He went up onto the strip mines. He went into the coal camps. He talked to the people. He asked the right questions. And I remember so well what my husband told me that night after he left. He said that when Robert Kennedy was about to get into the car to drive away from this whole thing, that he turned around and he came back to my husband and he took him by the hand and he said, "Mr. Cottle, we're going to come back and we're going to do something about all of this." And I think that gave my husband hope that something would be done about all of this. And much has been done, but there's an awful lot yet to be done.
How in '68 the tour brought attention, and I guess it just makes me wonder, how do you get people's attention? How do you really get people to pay attention to things that are important like those numbers and the inequities and actually do something about it?
well, maybe we all, Dee, why don't you?
I think it's difficult. I think that's really the tough question. In some ways, we live in a world where there's so many images and that there is so much science that's gone into using those images to create the emotional, the visceral response that the producer wants created. You know, whether that's selling you toothpaste or making sure how you vote or scaring you about what might happen in public policy or what might happen if your deodorant fails. It's all kind of a problem because how do you get a message out? I think it's more exacting now than it was in 1968 when we virtually had 3 television channels and news, and people read the newspaper. Yeah. And right now we have a situation where fewer and fewer people are reading the news, and we haven't quite gotten to the place where we're getting trustworthy reports out in this kind of a mass electronic media. So in some ways I think that we have to be demanding more of ourselves and of others, and just like I would say that those college students were demanding when they were talking to Senator Kennedy, I think in some ways we have to start fighting for a more thoughtful electorate, and we need to be pushing harder to put issues on a national scale. I mean, what we do is we try to find ways to get messages out, and usually the way we do that is we pick a fight, because that's the one way that you can get any attention. And it's a sad comment, but that's probably the one way that you can begin to get people to pay attention to an issue.
This is one of the proudest regions of the nation. We must all work together. It will depend on what we act against crime and its causes, and wipe the stain of violence from this land.